We're going to come now to our transpersonal experience. It's nice to note that the transit of the day, that the actual cross of the day is the 6-2, and we started yesterday with the 5-1, and we will finish this afternoon with the 6-3 cross, and we can all leave and go back into our own foundations, which is all very nice. Nice timing. Anyway, okay. At the moment that we make the transition through the 4-1, through the juxtaposition, the next stage in that is that we enter into the true left angle. We enter into the true left angle because, remember, the thing that kept the 4-1 connected to the right angle was the personality, the fourth line personality. But of course here we're going to enter into the fifth line personality. So we enter into this configuration of the 5-1 and the 5-1 through to the 6-3. These next four profiles, they all have their own cross structure. Now it's the same cross that we meet in the juxtaposition. However, the difference in this is at the moment that we're into the true left angle, what we have is transpersonal karma. And we're dealing here with an entirely different kind of being. One of the things to notice is that most of what profiling represents is a personal investigation into life. After all, that is what the lower trigram right angle theme is all about. It's about investigating life as unique forms, each and every one of us with the illusion of separateness. And it is out of those unique experiences that the general picture of what it is to be alive, what it is to be human, is revealed. But at the same time, those very people that are going through those experiences are not necessarily equipped to bring them to a larger audience, to bring them to a larger recognition, and to expand the general consciousness. In that way, we need our left angles. Because the nature of the left angle is, as a transpersonal cross, as something that is carrying deep personal karma, they're forced to go out there and do that job. To introduce, to bring what's new, to establish the new heresy, because of course we begin here with the fifth line personality, which is a heretical personality. Burn, baby, burn. When do I get my turn? The first thing to keep in mind about the nature of the fifth line. After all, the fifth line is the line of universalization. And its capacity to universalize is conditioned by the fact that everyone that meets it expects it to be able to do that. It's because there is no resistance. It's because there is a projection that what they can universalize can be of personal value to the person who's calling it out. They don't meet the resistance. They can get their universalizing energy outward. So it gives all fifth lines an advantage. That advantage is that the other is always open to them and open to their penetration, as long as that penetration brings something of value and is practical. Now, if they're open to you and you're a fifth line and you penetrate them and you don't give them something that's practical, you're going to get punished. And the way in which you're going to get punished is through your reputation. All fifth lines are very touchy about their reputation. It is very important to them what other people think about them. And they are always dealing with the spectrum of opinion. Because no fifth line is ever going to pull only one side as a projection. There's always going to be both sides. There are going to be people who say wonderful things about them and people who say terrible things about them. And that's the way their life is going to be from the moment that they come into the world. Because after all, the moment that you're dealing with the fifth line, you're dealing with deep expectation. And the great expectors are the parents of a fifth line child. You know, my father, what he expected of me, good God. You know, and he was just projecting on my fifth line saying, well, you know, you can be this and you can be that. And how disappointing. You know, I was into sex and drugs and rock and roll. What to do? But after all, the projection field, that's what it brings. So when you have a fifth line child and they come into the world, what do? You can't project on them. You can't say to them, you're going to be the best. Because it isn't going to work. When you're dealing with the 5-1 as a left-angle profile, this is the most transpersonal, as you will see, the most transpersonal of all the profiles. Remember that 6-line personalities are going to go through a period of aloofness, and they are transpersonal in a very different way. But when you're dealing with the 5th line, because this is the true completion of the hexagram, this is the tradition of the exalted line. The hopes and expectations of humanity lie on the shoulders of the 5th line. So when you're dealing with the 5-1, you're dealing with the fundamental universalizing force. But of course, like all first lines, they have to have their foundation. And if they don't have their foundation, remember that in the nature of all first lines is inferiority, sense of inadequacy, all of these things as potentials in them if they don't have the proper kind of foundation. The moment that they go out into the world, the moment it's projected on them that they can be the savior, the saint, the general, all these nice 5th line terms, if they can't deliver the goods, their reputation is instantly shattered. And the whole thing about being a 5-1 is that if you disappoint one person, it doesn't stop with them. They will tell as many people as they can. They will seek out revenge because you have broken their belief in you. You have smashed their hope. And because you've done that to them, they will let everybody know. This person, don't trust them, they're this, they're that, whatever the case may be. So all 5th lines grow up recognizing this pressure from very early childhood. And these are children that really suffer. You have a lot of children that break down very early in life, and it's interesting that the breakdown point for 5-1 children is around 7.5 years old. Now, it's something very important. In other words, it's the first Saturn quarter. And that's the place in which they can really break from the pressure. There's enormous pressure on children in their first 7 years to develop properly. You know, the moment they come out of the womb, you're counting their fingers and toes. And it keeps on going from there. You know, when they walk, when they talk, you know, when they're going to be able to do this, when they're going to be able to do that. And there is this intense watching of their development. Now, the 5 child has a projection field around it. It's getting incredible pressure on it. And because there's that pressure on it, it is so easy for these children not to be equipped, not to have the foundation yet, because their timing isn't the same as the expectation around them. And as such, you know, they can end up going deep, deep into an inner place, locking themselves away on the inside. And locking themselves away, they have, after all, a first line unconscious that needs to have its time of study, that needs to be able to do its homework and be left alone. And that 5th line, if it has that pressure in its early childhood, gets very distorted. You know, as you can see, it doesn't matter what the profile is, there is a strategy for parenthood. It's so important to understand that all of these children have a right, a basic human right, you know, to be allowed to be themselves. And that if you have a 5th line child, you cannot put that pressure on them, because they're not ready to handle that. It's going to take them time. The result is the intense paranoia that permeates the 5th line life. And it is a paranoia that is actually in its healthiest aspect, is simply an endless suspicion. It is a suspicion of the projection field itself. You know, what do people actually see? And what are they actually seeing when they're projecting on the fifth line? And when you have the 5-1 and the first line at the unconscious level is the chameleon, you can begin to see that the 5-1, not only can they disappear into themselves, but they can also have this sense that nobody really sees them. That all they're seeing is the projection field. And not only that, when they begin to recognize, and they do, because they're the purest transpersonal line, that other people want something from them, you know, their suspicion is very, very clear. You know, they begin to see that, you know, what they're after is their hope and their need for their fulfillment of that projection. And that the fifth line is then put under the pressure of being between a rock and a hard place. You either deliver the goods or you suffer exponentially out of those that are disappointed or don't get what they need from you. You know, one of the things that I advise all 5-1s is that they've got to have a thick skin. But more important than a thick skin, they have to be deep in what it is that they know. And as long as they're deep in what they know, then they can live out their potential. Live out their potential to be able to universalize. It is only these forces that bring things to the planet. It is only these forces that always go beyond their family to the clan, and beyond the clan to the tribe, and beyond the tribe to the collective, and so forth. They have a capacity within them, once they are properly grounded, to be able to universalize, because they're the only profile that doesn't meet resistance. They only get into trouble afterwards, because everything they do is measured. Everything. Every act, every action is being measured in the projection field. That's why it's a wonderful strategy for all fifth lines to know when to disappear. You know, the moment that they're successful in being able to practically give a solution, get the hell out of that person's aura. Go away. You see, because what they're going to do is that they're going to tell all kinds of people about how wonderful you were. And then they really get into that. And that's great for your reputation. You know, just get away. That's what fifth lines do. And then their reputation grows and they gain from that. You see, there's a mysteriousness to them. And that mysteriousness grows when they know how to withdraw and wait in the wings like the good general, waiting for their opportunity on the edge of history. Waiting for their opportunity to step in and be history and be rewarded for it. And of course what that means is that all 5-1s have to learn patience in life. You know, I'm an Aries. I'm an Aries 5-1 manifester. You know, patience. That is really something to master in this life. And the only thing that does that is awareness. Because awareness, if you're really clear, you will see that we are helpless and have no choice, and then you can take all the pressure off what it is to be. And you can just let it happen. So with the 5-1, we have the heretic investigator. Now think about the nature of the heretic. The nature of the heretic is that the heretic can bring a completely new standard. It can impact profoundly on human principle. And of course, what is difficult to deal with is that the heretic is somebody who has a natural gift of universalizing. That's what makes them dangerous. You know, the 4 is not dangerous. It's just annoying. But the 5 is dangerous because it doesn't have the resistance field, so it can put its virus, its concept, its philosophy, its whatever into others. And if it's practical, it can turn over the apple cart and disturb an awful lot of people. So you have a pure heretic. And what that means is that if there is no foundation, If the introspection, if the investigation is not there and it's not fulfilled, they're going to burn over and over again in life. 5-1s can be very sad people. Because, of course, genetically it is their gift to have real power in this life. To be able to communicate the essence of something in this life. And that they can end up being forced from town to town, literally, feeling like it's impossible for them. The projected attitude, this is the general with the authoritarian underneath. This is a real force to contend with. It's telling you that at the unconscious level they must be the authority. Again, this goes back to the need for study. The more they study, the deeper they go into something, the more solid they are in their ability to be able to universalize. And it is not for them to be trivial and impractical. That's for other profiles. It is for them to be practical. Because the only things that universalize are what's practical. The only things. So if you want to set off a chain of events on this planet, you're going to have a logical basis to it. Otherwise, it's not going to move through everything. And that's their gift. As we know, the general waits in the wings before it uses its power. And really what it's doing is it's feeling out the situation. Remember that the 5th line is the 2nd floor. The light isn't on. They're watching the crowd below. They're watching the movie. They're waiting for their moment to enter. That's their gift, is a gift of timing. There is nothing more chaotic than a 5-1 that's trying to universalize all the time. It's like taking a drive in a car with me. I don't talk. If you're expecting a human design lecture, you're in trouble. It's so important to know when not to be involved as a 5-1, because every time you involve yourself, you put your reputation on the line. Every time. It doesn't matter whether it's the smallest thing. It's the nature of the projection field that it's attached to the 5. The limited perspective is the savior, and it's the empathic savior. Now, I'm a 5-1 and I find that embarrassing. However, what to do? This assumption that you can really be of value to another. I'm a pure individual. I find that really gross. However, what to do? Individuals assume that everybody should be able to look after themselves, which is why I teach you the way that I do, so that you have this knowledge for yourself and you can find out for yourself. However, being a 5th line, it's projected on me, so I can be a savior through being a good teacher in that sense. But that projection's always there. And if I couldn't deliver the goods, I'm not a savior anymore. I'm a devil. And that's one of those things to keep in mind. I know both sides of that line. I know people who project on me that I'm as dark can be, and those who project that I'm lily white. Well, all right, but I'm the 5-1. I know there's a projection field out there. That's just the way that it works. So it's something important to understand that if you have a 5 and you have a child that's a 5, think about all the pressure that's being put on them psychically. And of course, the moment that they have a problem, it's a disaster within the family. Because everybody's projected on them that they're going to be this and they're going to be that. And instead of being saintly, they're the devilish kid. Where'd that apple come from? Whose genes are in this one? However, they are deeply empathic at the unconscious level, and they are very open. It is that very openness that allows them to keep their eye on what's going on. It's like being a musician and knowing when to come into a piece of music. There's a moment for everything. This is the perspective of the second floor. Like the 6, both the 5 and 6 have their unique perspectives. They're not really involved, like the right angle, in their own thing. They're very much involved in understanding other human beings and how to deal with them, and how to be able to get their process through, but it's always transpersonal. Their gift is with the other. That empathy allows them to absorb the other in order to find out what the other needs, in order for them to see if they have anything practical that will meet those needs and be able to satisfy them. And if they don't find that, then they cannot involve themselves. They cannot become the savior. They have to stay out of the movie. They have to stay in the wings. It's much better for a 5-1 to have impact and then wait 10 years, than to jump into the next thing. Because the longer they wait, you wait and see what happens when I'm dead. You have no idea what that's like. You take a 5-1 out of the world that's been of any value, and you watch what happens to their reputation. You got this enormous expansion, eh? I suckled 9 snakes when I was born. And the aspired to role. The aspired to role is the key of what the 5th is all about. It's about attractiveness. Attractiveness is their form of creativity. Look at me. I'm just, an archetypal role. That's what it is. It's a very creative role. But that's natural to any 5-1. They have to have that. They have to put their energy into their identity. In other words, they're creative in terms of how to make themselves attractive. They know how to get attention. They know how to draw attention to themselves. After all, that's their gift. And what's important to them is that power of attracting attention goes beyond their personal presence. Otherwise, they have no real potential as real universalizers. This is what they're all about. Now, of course, at the same time, being attractive also creates the paranoia, particularly if you're not comfortable with your foundation. And this is the real dilemma. 5-1s are going to have real problems in life unless they get an early and solid foundation. Because then it's a real ordeal. Their reputation is never going to survive that. Because they're constantly attractive and they're constantly pulling other forces to them. And of course what's going to happen is over and over and over again, they're going to put their foot in their mouth. And their reputation is going to fall. And then they have to start fresh somewhere else because they can't stay where they are. Because remember, when a 5-1 crashes, everybody gets to know about it. Everybody cheers. Everybody's out there saying, see, I knew that one was no good. It's the way it works. And so they move to the next town. This is what the heretic is all about. This is the wandering heretic. Until they find their true heresy. Until they find the principle that they can live by. And again, that's rooted in how deep their foundation is. The bonding strategy. They are seducers. That's their whole job. And by the way, the seducer seduced is simply a matter of type. Manifestors are going to seduce you. I seduce you to knowledge. That's my job in this life as a 5. I'm here to seduce you. If I was a generator, I'm waiting to be the seduced, pull them in so I can seduce them. There is different techniques depending on your type, and different authority that finally says it's okay. But the 5th line personality is simply a seductive personality, and it's not the same as being lecherous. It can be, but it's not the same as. You're right, yeah.
The seduction is a matter of their genetics. After all, it's a role. Not only that, if they don't seduce their lover, it's not the right lover. I mean, after all, that's their genetic strategy. Their genetic strategy is to be the seducer. Underneath all of that, you can see the force of the 5-1. Because, of course, underneath that, you have the pursuer and the pursued. So the fact of the matter is that the 5-1 knows exactly what it wants and has to go out there and get it. Now, 9 times out of 10, they don't really have to do very much. Because the fact of the matter is that because they're a 5, the person that they want, at least at first impact, is going to think, here comes my salvation. Now that can be very misleading. After all, that foundation has to be solid, but that can give the impression to anyone. This person can be my savior, this person can be my guardian, this whatever the case may be. This one is really going to answer my life problems. Yeah, there's a lot of disappointment waiting in that kind of expectation. You know, because the fact is that there are very few 5-1s on the planet that have a strong enough foundation that they really can be universalizers. Where this really can be seen is that the role of the 5-1 is to translate what we understand as sexual energy into actual everyday life. In other words, the vibration that I put out as a teacher has a deep sexual connotation to it, because it is the quality of seduction that's really at work. It's not about the necessity for personal intimacy. And of course that often gets very confused. It's one of the things we notice about our relationship with teachers anyway, is that we always fall in love with good teachers. It's only natural for us to do that. We all did that as students. There was always a teacher we fell in love with, because it's a very natural thing to take place. Because the teacher is actually pouring love at you. And not in the hippy-dippy way of looking at that. I mean, you know, what they're trying to do is seduce you into loving what they're telling you about. So it is a seduction in which the tantra of that is that they're playing out a mundane role, but they're using an energy that has a sexual connotation because it is seductive. And they're pursuing you, after all. They're penetrating you and they're saying, come on, you know. That's why I don't wear snakes on my hat. Get anybody nervous. Yeah. Finally, we come to the security strategy. And one of the things to recognize about the 5-1 is that it's only of value to society when it's a self-provider. In other words, you know, what it universalizes has to keep it alive. You know, if human design didn't make a living for me, I really couldn't do it. I mean, I could still know it, but it's not like I could do it. You know, I'm not a threadbare saint. I don't walk through life that way. I've been there, done that. And it's very important to understand that the integrity of a 5-1 is rooted in having a strong foundation, and out of that foundation being able to be secure financially. After all, this is a security strategy. That's why the foundation is so important for them. And of course, remember, they're under pressure from their parents because their parents have very high expectations about what they can be. So they do have advantages, as long as they deliver. You know, if your parents are going to spend a fortune on your education and you flunk out, you know, this is bad for your reputation. And it's going to create problems in the future. So that the moment that you have this strong foundation, the 5-1 then can achieve what's necessary for it. That is, its financial security. And out of that security comes its power to universalize. And they go hand in hand. So one of the things that tells us about the 5-1 as a profile is that it takes them time in life until they actually find their financial security. That they find something in which their principles can be embodied in their material path. Those of you who know me long enough and worked with me know that one of the things that is very important for me that people understand is that to be awake is to be awake in the world. The fifth line personality is practical. You know, I have lover and family and children. I have a human life. I go to the supermarket and shop. I clean babies' asses. I do all of these things. It's practical. And it's one of the things that the fifth line brings into the world, is the potential to realize that to be awake is not to be a sadhu on the side of a mountain. That's easy. That's easy. And it doesn't mean anything. You have to be in the world, and you have to be in what is our ordinary human life. And to exalt that in being awake, to recognize that in each life we have our mythology, and that mythology is truly profound. It's one of the messages of the 5-1, is to see that the practical life is what has to be universalized at its highest level. That's what I bring to you. I bring to you an opportunity that through our practical life with each other, we can have a deep recognition and understanding. That's a community of awakenedness. That's a real deep opportunity for us to, get to see what it's really like to be human and together, and to see the beauty in all of that. So it is the practical that dominates that theme. And that means that the 5-1 has to have a stable life. These are stable heretics. They need that. They need a secure foundation. They need the proper grounding in the world in order to be able to universalize. Because you see, if they don't have a strong foundation, that universalization will fall apart. I know many teachers in the world, and there's many things that are missing. Lots of them don't have children. And I look at a teacher that claims to be a world teacher and they don't have children, and I think, well, something funky in that. I mean, I'm a 5. That's not a judgment. That's just my 5 saying, well, yes, but there's something missing. I mean, after all, having a child is the greatest love of all. There is nothing like it. There's absolutely nothing like it. So what to do? It doesn't mean that you're less of a being because you don't have that, but if you're really going to teach, that's something else. That's what the 5 thinks. The 5 thinks, look, all of these practical things, that's what matters. It's what matters because that's what life is. So only when they have their solid foundation are they going to be able to universalize, and they're going to be able to resonate in that with others.